Ink is like blood, it's like viscous.
Hey, Satanico here once again for God Loves Comics, and this is Original Artefacts Episode 7. Okay, it's been a long time coming since Paul Pope is one of my favorite modern cartoonists alongside Frank Quitely, and with the assumption that Jaime Hernandez is from the previous generation. I fully intended to do a selection of Pope original art from 3 or 4 different pieces, but came across this very recent auction of the first 4 pages of Pope's virtuoso turn on Batman Year 100, and found it juicy enough to sink my teeth into it as a first foray into Pope on original artifacts. I intend to get to the other stuff like 100%, Heavy Liquid, THB, Battling Boy, Solo, etc. later on. It's certainly worth noting that these 4 pages sold as a single lot for $71,875 on Heritage, which was to be expected given that a typical Pope page usually goes for around $10K these days, and pages with Batman are bound to be at a premium. Still, for pages from a comic less than 20 years old, it's an eye-opening figure. But enough about craven monetary values. There are enough low-life scum channels that talk about the comics medium as if it's only a junk bonds market, so let's get to the actual art.
Ink is like blood, it's like viscous. And it's alive too. This is a carbon-based ink. So it will rot if you leave it open too long. So when I open a bottle, I try to finish it within a month.
Ink is like blood is a great line that romanticizes art and could very well have come from the lips of Lord Byron. But where blood is precious and you try not to spill much of your own, and hopefully no one else's, Pope is almost legendary for his copious spillage of ink across most of his pages, and now we know it's because his ink rots. If ink is like blood, then a typical Pope page is like the floor of an emergency room in the middle of a war zone. Here on page 1, Pope draws a savage and feral Batman who, despite being 100 years removed from his origins, seems to have regressed, becoming more, not less animalistic. Pope's future Batman is beefy like Frank Miller's Dark Knight, but more athletic and less plodding. He's also a long stride from the debonair image of Bruce Wayne, which is all the more interesting because Pope's first foray into the Bat universe was his infamous Jewish Batman, in which Baruch Wayne was an effete Oscar Schindler-esque dandy prancing about coyly in a pink bathrobe that would have made Hugh Hefner blush. However, Pope's future Batman would only be seen in a pink bathrobe if it were stained that color by his own blood. Pope doesn't even bother to black out Batman's cape to the edges of his panel, thus making it look like a cape in tatters in these frantic close-ups. But when the shots pull back, we see the full cape again, heavily stylized, but definitely not to Todd McFarlane proportions, where the cape is a major design element, if not the central character. Batman's boxer shorts over his tights work surprisingly well. Far better, in fact, than Jack Kirby's original Black Panther design, for which Stan Lee wisely suggested a revision that ended up looking much more like Dick Ayer's original Panther prototype. Pope's choice of chunky combat boots also works well. What's interesting on the originals are the details on the utility belt and brown line, as well as at the bottom of the page. On older artwork, such discoloration is always from aged glue stick, but these pages are dated 2003 and published in 2006. I wasn't sure if it was similar to a non-repro blue, but a few artists on the GLC Facebook group said that it's likely just a cheap non-archival marker that Pope picks up for a few lines when he has to rest his brush. On page 2, Pope gives us a close-up of those combat boots with the floppy laces being a significant design element. Pope uses the horizontal panels to juxtapose Batman with the dogs. This time it's only on the bat's feet and the dog's paws. The splashes of water from each indicates both speed and desperation. Also, Pope's leaving the Rottweiler's paws white very intentionally hammers home his juxtaposition with Batman's white shoelaces. That juxtaposition is mostly lost in the final colored pages, however. The bottom panel is nothing but big, muscular brushwork, filling the page with black masks, sharp teeth, and rabid eyes. The dog at the center foreground carries the whole page for Pope, with its arched back allowing its hind legs to reach its front paws, suggesting a full gallop. With this one dog, Pope gives just enough accurate canine anatomy to allow him to draw the front of the pack, leaping out of the panel as little more than impressionistic shapes with bobbed tails. Again, the non-archival brown appears as well, and again not as background fill, but as a tool Pope employs for details on the dog's collars. Page 3. Pope's Batman here quite literally looks more exaggerated than Harvey Kurtzman and Wally Wood's classic Mad parody Super Duper Man. Pope's Batman is given an overbite that, along with the arc of his nose, all but mimics the dog's snout, which is clearly what Pope is thinking in juxtaposing the feral Batman with that of the salivating Rottweilers on his heels. Still, this profile of Batman is so outrageous that it's amazing that DC even approved it. After all, DC once guarded its most hallowed properties in Batman and Superman from Jack Kirby because his representations were a little too off-brand, and John Romita wasn't around to fix the faces as he was at Marvel. They would only let Kirby draw Superman in the Jimmy Olsen books, which no one read, although Kirby always claimed that Olsen was his choice. So it is extraordinary that die-hard Batman readers so willingly accepted Pope's goofy, rubber-lipped, buck-toothed, Jerry Lewis-looking Batman. Clearly, it's because the raw power of Pope's overall presentation allows for the integration of his visual subversion. 20 years ago, Pope told me that he hated the utter silliness of the 60s TV Batman, but clearly he doesn't revere the character in the way a purist might. He doesn't require his Batman to be a teeth-gritting Dark Knight in all scenarios, and is perfectly willing to make him a feral savage when running from a pack of dogs, or a preening dandy detective in his World War II era short stories from the early 2000s. In the final horizontal panel, Pope draws his odd, organic, retro-style Gotham in a style similar to the many cityscapes he included in his Vertigo forays 100% in heavy liquid. Pope's Gotham City is not painstakingly drawn with a ruler and seeking the arch perfection of a George Perez or Art Adams cityscape, but instead it is given a loose, organic quality. Although Pope did put more work into the stunning splash than he even needed to, given that his quick, chunky brush lines can effectively produce impressionistic buildings while barely slowing what appears to be a frenzied pace of splashing ink onto the page. Pope's buildings look solid without ever looking antiseptic or sterile. They look like they could bend down and pick a flower or expand their frames to take heaving breaths when the humans aren't looking. Finally, on page 4, the lines for the architecture are sharper here. Maybe a straight edge was actually used. Pope centers the tiny figure of Batman, whose cape now appears to have sprouted into wings, floating in between the buildings, which lends them an impressive sense of scale. The final horizontal panel may not look like much at first glance, just a front shot of the dogs again drawn with the impressionistic economy and speed. But somehow, with a few obvious lines, Pope illustrates the dog screeching to a halt, and there is no screech sound effect either. Some of them have muzzles contorted in snarls of teeth, while the two dogs at the center both have their tongues hanging out from the fatigue of the chase. Most easily overlooked is a third dog from the left who has to slam on the brakes so hard he goes ass over paws, his blank-eyed, goofy face turned to one side and his stubby tail pointed straight up. This adds a comical element to the page, but also serves the important purpose of again showing that the dogs have reached the impasse of the building ledge, which Batman can traverse, as his flying namesake suggests, but the earthbound Rottweilers, despite all their canine fury, cannot. In other words, it's more stellar cartooning from Pope. And that's it for the latest episode of Original Artifacts. Please take a nanosecond to leave a like, it really helps. Subscribe if you haven't already, and comment if you will. I read them all and I try to respond to them all as well. We're still on Facebook. 2,000 members on the Facebook group. Thanks for watching. See you next time on God Loves Comics. Goodbye.